unlike the regular method of moderation, where there's a lot of gyan that the moderator tends to have, on this issue we're all on the same page. Things are changing on a daily basis. Even for India, it's not very clear what it must do and what it must not do. I think that's even more important. The negative is more important than the positive in this end. So first, may I ask you, Shreya, to talk about what you feel, and in a couple of sentences also talk about where you come from in the sense of to approach this topic. Thank you. Yeah.
Is this? Oh, okay. Very good morning, everyone, and I'm actually glad that we're starting the session. They're starting the day with this session, and I'm a professor, assistant professor at Christ University. So I give a very layman plus analyst perspective to my students on everything that is happening. I am also a fellow at Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. And again, the idea is, as you very rightly pointed out, to understand what is happening and what are, what are the next steps that India should take. But what we are witnessing, to kind of deep dive into the topic, what we're witnessing today is weaponization of the trade policy, and trade barriers as we speak right now are being redefined. So from what was 50% tariff that we were talking in 2025, there is now a looming 500% wall that we're looking at. And it's a lesson for us as well on how transactional geopolitics is there in making, which is taking place. And now what is the trigger? The trigger is actually the energy. The Sanctioning Russia Act 2025 calls for 500% duty on countries purchasing the Russian oil. Now, by August 2025, the duty was 50%. 10% of it was baseline, 25% was reciprocal tariff, and then the rest was other penalties and taxes, which had already led to a 15% drop in Indian exports on our traditional strongholds, from textiles to gems to engineering products. But the paradox remained because the electronic goods grew by 50.5%. Again, it shows that the areas where there is US dependencies, we are able to call the shots. Another stronger leverage for us has been pharmacy. So India supplies about 47% of the generic prescriptions, and Indian generics in 2022 saved US healthcare $219 billion. And the cumulative savings in the last decades have been about $1.3 trillion. Again, shows the areas of mutually assured dependencies will survive. Now, what should be our strategic pivot in this case? One is what I feel is there needs to be a market decoupling. We're already working on it. Indian exporters are moving to UAE, Spain, UK. We are now bringing out a lot of reforms that were long pending. And then there are comprehensive trade agreements. The other is upgrading technology. India, as I see, is like an assembly line in the global factory, which means that we are not the engineers or the raw material providers. You know, we are not. So we really need to move up the value chains. And again, it's a great. We can take that lesson from South Korea, which in 1980s, again, US had sanctioned South Korea, and it was creating a lot of low-cost manufacturing products, and then they kind of leaped to semiconductors. This is when Japan was already had a first-mover advantage, but South Korea took the second-mover advantage. They created research institutions. There was a lot of government investment and things like that. India today is investing in PLI schemes, the product-linked incentives for high-tech manufacturing, but we need to definitely do much more. India can also do a lot. India has been doing in 2025. There's been an increase in refined fuel export, in gasoline and diesel export, and again, that's something which kind of works for us. what we need to address definitely is infrastructure and regulatory bitterness. We need to decouple growth from geographic concentrations. We obviously can sell to ASEAN and Africa, but the problem is that it is not a substitute for advanced economy demand. And but then what is the way out? The way out is India needs to create multiple revenue streams across different value propositions, which means that a lot of cost efficiency products need to be sold to Africa, quality and reliability products to ASEAN, and more innovative and partnership based things with European Union and United States as well. Now, how can India negotiate? India can only negotiate by this recognition that there is mutual interdependence. US does need pharma. US still wants a Chinese alternative. US wants India to be a balancer in the Indo-Pacific. US wants a democratic tech partner, and we are giving all of them to that. But then that negotiation cannot happen if we do not show that we have alternatives. And we have alternatives. We are an emerging economy. ASEAN is a deep partner. We have partnership in BRICS, even though China is still a competitor and needs to be seen as a competitor. But there are areas in which we can collaborate. Because even in BRICS, we need to realize that Russia is kind of a diminished partner in that sense. But ASEAN, again, provides economic Indo-Pacific space. And lastly, I just want to conclude that for us, economic pragmatism and geopolitical signaling, both of it needs to go hand in hand. India has always believed in issue-based partnerships. The focus needs to be more for plurilateral, multilateral agreements, resisting any kind of bloc formation as much as we can. And we need to understand that there cannot be any compromise on the economic sovereignty. So what we need is deeper R&D, more tech control, more talent development. Thank you.
Thank you, Shreya. Preetham.
Thank you. So I think what I would like to start from is the context of where this happened and go back a few years. I think there was a growing recognition both in other parts of the world, but especially in India, that the consensus that was achieved post 1991-92 is fraying. So the global rules of trade that we take for granted will come under threat. So then even for India, what was the strategic imperative for trade? That A, we need to find alternatives to get binding market access for our goods and services. And the services part is important. Because if we are going to achieve our Viksit Bharat goals, we need to grow around 8%, around that, 8.5% per annum. My domestic economy will give me 5.5%, 6%. That extra 2.5% will have to come from global demand. So market certainty for the global demand is important as a policy objective. So then we have three major challenges that countries in my stage of development earlier, even including China, did not face. What are those three challenges? A, the so-called green transition, which means my ability to grow on the back of very cheap energy will be challenged, already being challenged by policies like CBAM, etc. So I need to transit. It will be forced upon me and it is expensive. The second challenge will be the fact that we have this huge behemoth called China. And let me underline why. Because China's current situation is somewhat unprecedented in the history of industrialized world. Here is a country which has close to 1/3 of global manufacturing output. No country at its peak has had this much dominance. But even more importantly, if I break up in sectors of the 66 manufacturing sectors, as far as the ISIC, the International Standard Industrial Classification, China has at least 25% or more share of output, not trade, in 56 of them. So they are dominant across labor-intensive and technology-intensive sectors. So everybody was worried. I mean, this is not something that is very, is unprecedented, as I said. So how do you deal with this? The green transition, you have this. And then there is the whole idea of automation, right? So this labor cost arbitrage that the developing Asia, China, etc., could rely upon is not a luxury available to me, because automation is reducing the wedge between using low cost labor and using capital. So, given these challenges, I had to move fast. So, my strategy for FTS, and this is predates our US crisis, was to have at least 90% of my market access with the world tied up through binding free trade agreements. And why is services important? Because the digital transition, the other transition that's happening, is making it possible for me to do remotely things that were unheard of before. And given absolute numbers of skilled people that I have, that's a massive, massive opportunity. It's going to be my second middle class revolution. If the IT revolution of Y2K was my first, which created my Noidas and Gurgaons, this is 5x of that. So it's a huge, huge. So I have to also do that binding market access. Given that scenario, therefore, all of these FTAs, and people have, in the media, there have been this discussion, why are you doing one with New Zealand? It's a tiny country the size of RK Puram and stuff like that. But all of those numbers build up to that 90%. But that also means, and I can say this now openly, is that there's one country with whom I will not do an FTA, which is my northern neighbor. Why? Because then essentially what happens is my MFN tariff, so-called my WTO tariff, becomes my China tariff effectively, which means I can play around with that legally, unlike what the Americans are doing. So that was my strategy going forward. Now, part of the strategy obviously was the US, and that there was the curveball that landed on me, earlier this year, right? So now coming to that curveball, what, just to take up from what Shreya, the reason why electronics and pharmaceuticals did not get hit is because they did not put tariffs there. The tariffs have come in 3 different tranches. The first round of tariffs is a so-called national security exception, the Section 232, where the Americans did the first attack on the WTO on the MFN principle, saying, no, we are going to impose these tariffs which are going to exceed our bound commitments in the WTO because steel and aluminium are essential for my security. And nobody can interpret. I refused to give the right of interpretation to the WTO, which I had signed on, to challenge my policies. And now they're doubling down on that. The second tariffs are the so-called reciprocal tariffs, right, which are the tariffs that are differentiated, put on different countries. And electronics was, exempted, so was pharmaceuticals. And later, in just a few weeks back, tariffs on a lot of the consumption goods, grocery items have also been taken off because the inflationary pressure on the American economy is creating, political backlash. So these are things, and of course, the Supreme Court decision on whether these tariffs are legal, they have been challenged in the American legal system, and the decision is expected on 14th of January. So these are all the moving parts that we have. Now, for India, 25%, which was our reciprocal rate, was not a big deal because my competitors are in 19-20%. We all know, those of us who have read transaction cost economics, that changing a supplier that 5-6% doesn't make a difference. The suppliers will stick on to you. The marginal difference is there. So I would not have lost any export share had it been 25%. The problem came with this punitive extra 25% tariffs due to the Russian oil purchases. So at 50, where am I hit? I am hit where it hurts the most, because I am hit in carpets, ready-made garments, footwear, handicrafts, which are all labor-intensive sectors. And there I am definitely facing headwinds and shifting away from a market like the US, which gives the exporter a premium which very few other economies can afford, is going to be difficult. Yes, there is a policy that is in place. There's attempts are being made. And of course, my agreement with the European Union, there's another premium market, will definitely help me, because there I am at a disadvantage. Because my competitors in the European market, Bangladesh, they all have GSPs.
May I ask you to now close your initial remarks, and then we'll get back.
I just got 5 minutes, but okay, sure.
Just 5 minutes, and then we'll do another 2-3 rounds.
Okay, so just to wrap up over there. So that's my, given the my challenges with the fact that I'm having a disadvantage with Bangladesh and the Vietnams of the world, European Union agreement will give me an advantage, especially on these sectors: carpets, ready-made garments, footwear, etc. So I need to wrap that up quickly. But yeah, I'll close.
Thank you.
Is it working?
Prakal.
Yeah. Hi. So I'm assistant professor at the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics. Gokhale Institute has been in existence for almost a century, and mine is the first politics program at the Gokhale Institute. It specializes in economics. So all of our students there are finding themselves in a kind of an identity crisis, whether they're geopolitics students or whether they're economic students. And I also myself finding, in that same situation here also. So let me just take off from that. So what Shreya said was actually a lot of what I was going to say. So I had to figure out what I'm planning to say. But no, building on what they have said, I think this crisis has also been a godsend gift in some ways, right? I mean, so we have always been thinking about engaging with US and that there is favorable international environment for our growth. But in the euphoria about that, I think we often missed out that our challenges lie at our domestic level, right? I mean, so all said and done, since 2015, I mean, when Make in India was launched, share of manufacturing was at 15%. It has not grown beyond that. Even after a decade, it is at 15%. Same goes for even capital inflows as well as the technology that is supposed to come in, right? I mean, just today I was reading Ruchir Sharma's article where he has this argument that despite 8% growth that we have been reading about, foreign investors are not coming to India. In fact, there is a brain drain that is happening. Indians are leaving India for better markets. Indian private sector is not investing enough. I think we have heard finance minister say that to corporates, right? I mean, they are not doing there enough. But it also tells us that there is a problem at home, that we are still not able to fix our problems, especially when it comes to land. Labor market reforms, yes. Recently we saw labor codes come in, but I think that is still that will take time for sort of corporates to accept and move on from that. With respect to the overall ease of doing business, I think it is something that we have to do. There is a lot more that can be done on that front, and American tariffs have sort of opened up that possibility, right? I mean, because India itself is such a huge market that if we are able to trade with each other more, if we can fix problems at home, it will be rather easy for us to sort of take on abroad and the competition that we face there. Secondly, I think this is again a 1991 moment. We argued that last year also, and we are still in that 1991 moment. The only difference was that in 1991, crisis was so severe that people could go ahead and launch economic reforms. This time, it has not yet happened. There has been that incremental effort to fix what we can do, and that too reluctantly. So I think the entire approach that we need to have regarding economic policy has to change. There are a lot of things that need to be fixed. Also, with respect to this sort of situation, I think we find ourselves in an historically unprecedented situation, right? I mean, we have never had this sort of situation where our closest partner turns on us. Economic interdependence was supposed to bring benefits, but liberal theory never told us that economic interdependence can also be weaponized and that it will be turned against weaker countries. It was all about shared benefits of trade, benefits of interdependence, and that wars would come down. Little did we know that it would lead to something called as trade war. So I think this realization is dawning on us. And the problem this time has been that we have never been told how to deal with this sort of crisis. So in 1990s, early 90s, my mind goes back to what US used to do with Kashmir and non-proliferation. They used to harass us for like almost a decade. Entire 90s was about that. But the difference was that our interdependence wasn't as high. We were not dependent on US markets then as we are dependent on American market now. So this is historically unprecedented. Soviet Union was never this sort of blackmailing partner as such, even though we had close ties with them. And so I think we have to find a way out. And my final point is with this entire debate about Russian oil, I mean, is it really that important? I mean, why can't we get away from Russian oil? And because oil market is a fungible market, right? I mean, you can always find other suppliers. You have people in Gulf, you have Venezuela now coming up. So I think what we can do is to maintain Russia, maybe get some more from defense side, which will also take a lot of time to negotiate and also fruition, which means we will have to ride out what Donald Trump is going to face in the midterm elections. And maybe by November 2026, situation will be a lot different than what we think right now is. So I think, Russian oil, if Americans are so hell-bent on that, I think it is better to just get rid of that and figure out other markets with energy transition also kicking in, right? I mean, so this is also an opportunity that way where I think we can focus a lot more on other markets. And I think let's wait for November 2026, I think, because still Donald Trump is weakened domestically. it will be very difficult for us because we don't have as many cards as we thought we could have. Even banking on the Indo-Pacific strategy, what US wants us to do, they are still not relenting on the economic front. And the last point I would want to say is, I think we are back to the old power politics, Darbar kind of a situation where either Howard Lutniks and others, whoever is whispering in Donald Trump's ears, I think we will have to figure out a way to get them to, be happy with India and relent Donald Trump's pressure. So I think I would end here. And
Thank you. You've been taking judicious notes all through. So go ahead. But 5 minutes initially, please, and then we'll do another round.
Could I have my slides? Could I have my slide? Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Bhandari. Thank you, ORF and Nalanda for having me back in, Bihar. I think it's more than coincidence that my first place of formal employment from 2010 ORF gets me back to my first place of domicile, Bihar. I'll quickly jump into trade tariffs, trade wars, and tariffs and so on. But I'm going to move to the other side of the great G2 dream which the US has, to the PRC or to China. I'm a professor of China studies at OP Jindal Global University. I've taught elsewhere in Guwahati University, Don Bosco University, and had a stint at India's Ministry of External Affairs. What the US is doing right now in terms of tariffs and trade wars in a very loud and crass way is something which the PRC has always done to India in the last many years. I've just pulled out 3 examples from 2018 onwards, and there's a long list of this. So there is a playbook. It's just that the PRC doesn't do it in this loud and crass manner, which Donald Trump and his administration do. Just few quick examples. 2018 to 2013, there was an anti-dumping duty, basically a chemical used in dyes. The more recent one, last year, 117% tariffs on India's fertilizers. That happened. So because one of the questions which is given to us is also on what do we do within the BRICS? How do we navigate this? The fact is, let's take a leaf out of what we've done vis-a-vis the PRC in the last many years. So last year, when the 117% tariffs on Indian it's called cypermethrin was slapped on by the PRC, what India did is that it had a fertilizer deal with Saudi Arabia in July in 2025. While it was a way out of these tariffs, the deal was also to secure reliable imports of diammonium phosphate. It's a key phosphatic fertilizer because China had slapped these export restrictions as well on phosphates. And there were supply chain shortages which were difficult for Indian farmers. So that was one way out. Yesterday, and I know Dr. Bhandari said he didn't read the news today morning, but yesterday there was also a news that Reliance has cancelled plans to produce lithium-ion batteries in India. And the reason is this very small firm in the PRC. It's called Lithium, and it's a tiny Chinese battery maker, 1/200th the size of RIL. And this tiny firm refused to license its tech to one of India's most powerful groups. So that's where we are. So it happens in the shadows. This has happened always in the past. So there is a way out. Coming to the US, I think all the other 3 panelists have talked about the tariffs and the effects. Immediate effects were there, but the overall impact was moderate and short-lived because the exports to the US in, say, November 2025, they rebounded. They were about 22.6% year on year. Overall, Indian exports grew April to November 2025, about $562 billion combined in goods and services. There are long-term risks, of course. They persist. No one really knows what Donald Trump is going to do. On the other hand, China cannot be forgotten. It's not been a friend, not even in the economic realm. There is a need to build long-term resilience beyond just temporary adaptations. Here is where I will invoke what Dr. Samir Saran said yesterday. Within the BRICS, we need to be able to also speak to our partners and to the PRC in particular. Now, the PRC's position is also weakened because years of trade wars, because of the crumbling Chinese economy, manufacturing-led growth. That's another Pandora's box, which I can probably go into during the Q&A. So the PRC is also trying to throw out these feelers to India. What India did, and I'm going to use some sector-specific diversion examples. In the realm of marine products and seafood, US shipments were down by roughly 27%, but India's overall exports grew to about 20% here because there were surges to China, to Vietnam, to Russia. Within the EU, In the Belgium, it was by plus 124%. To Netherlands, it was plus 56%. To Germany, it was plus 65%. So I've mentioned China over here. Now, given the fact that they are also in the BRICS and India holds the presidency this year, if they really want to cooperate, given that their position is also not as great as that is envisaged elsewhere in the world, if we could do this, if we can for temporary purposes also get the PRC to accept some of India's exports, I think that would be a great way out. Ready-made garment and textiles, they again increase to China, increase to EU and to West Asia. Overall, labor-intensive goods found new buyers in Latin America, in West Asia, in Eurasia, and so on. There are upcoming boosters in the forms of these FTAs, UK, Oman, New Zealand, which will unlock duty-free access. We are still negotiating. The trade talks are still ongoing with the US, because if we have to look at this G2, India's reliance on the US market is much more than it is on the PRC for a host of reasons, including H-1B visas, tech transfers, and so on. There's a need to strengthen alternative corridors, deepening ties with non-Western partners to offset US risks. But the focus or the fact that the PRC has not really been a great friend as is now being touted to be, that does not need to be forgotten. I'll quickly show one more slide to just talk about what can India do. This is just a suggestion. Within the BRICS, because we have assumed the 2026 presidency, there could be much more which can be done. Within the ASEAN, there's an ongoing review or the upgrade of the AITIGA goods FDA. The 2025 deadline was missed, but the next meeting is in February 2026. 2026 is also the year of India-ASEAN Year of Maritime Cooperation. Since I talked about seafood, this is one arena which we could look at. Global South within Africa, Latin America, etc. Funds for trade promotion capacity, or looking at initiatives like the International Solar Alliance, from which Donald Trump pulled out. That could also be focused, digital infrastructure, and so on. In short, just to conclude, what could India really do? There are quite a few segments in which there is no production of Indian goods. Just to give an example, after dinner, some of us friends were discussing Indians travel because the middle class now has the traveling capacity, the buying power, the money power. Do we have India-made European chargers? We don't. What we do keep buying, well, is the Chinese ones. Why are we not producing some of these? Very pinpointed focus on key sectors and where these could be leveraged, or focusing on even domestic consumption is something which should be thought of. Second is, when we are pushed to the extent, we do come up with solutions, some of which end up being very short-lived. So if this focus on moving the reliance away and true multi-alignment, pinpointed alignment is not the order of the day, we might just find ourselves in similar situations for the rest of eternity. I think the best way forward would be zero tolerance for focus dilution. And I'll just rest my case here, and I look forward to the second round. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's been a very interesting set of thoughts that have been shared. But I'd now like to challenge you all. This is about building inner resilience. We are in the land of the Buddha. So the question that I'm going to ask all of you now to just share with you what your thoughts are on in this situation where everyone is playing tit for tat, where no agreements are written in stone. Many of these FTAs, by the way, between different countries have also been reversed or have changed. How does one negotiate a situation where there are no rules? And if the rules are there, they're going to change tomorrow, right? So the question here, again, going back, how does India become resilient is the question. Let's not talk about what the world is doing, because we know now this is like a complete random walk that the world is taking. Now, what do we need to do? Starting with you, Shreya.
So again, as I also talked about this in my initial remarks, the biggest problem that I see in India is that we're still the assembly line, which means that we are not really making our own products end to end. So if we are taking eggs from someone, and if we are taking flour from someone, and if if you are microwaving it or ovening it and then making a cake out of it and then selling it to someone, that's problematic because those people can tomorrow refuse to give us eggs or butter or all of those things, or they would have tariffs on their own eggs and butter and then the prices go up. That is what India has been facing. So it needs to be, if we actually want control on the situation and if we want sovereignty, it has to come from Make in India, not just Make in India. It has to be manufactured in India. I keep saying that in a lot of my classrooms. I order from Amazon. It says Make in India. I open the package. It is actually made in Vietnam or made in China and repackaged in India and sold to us as made in India. You can't call the shots like that. You need to manufacture. You will never get the best product. You will never have the final product in the first go. The first outcome will be shoddy. The first outcome will, the first production will not be as great. But then you kind of develop. And that development can only happen in an incremental way, but that needs to start rather than thinking that we will kind of, assemble everything and we will give a great finished product. So that is the starting point, whether it is working in the areas of automobiles, whether it is working in the areas of EV, pharma, textile, all of that can be done in that regard. Along with that, I think a lot of co-production from with ASEAN countries, with West Asian countries is also the need of the hour. Diversification definitely is the need of the hour. I kind of agree with Sankalp to a certain extent when he said that what is it about the Russian oil? The same way that, India says that, we don't want to be entrenched in any kind of block formation. We need to diversify everything. We have been diversifying. Last year, the way we kind of also bought our energy supplies import from US was about 6.6%. So we are working, we are moving for diversification. We are just, Trump administration wants things to be done in 2 weeks' times. They will give us 3 Fridays and 2 Fridays to.
Let's talk about internally, not Trump.
Yeah. So the thing is, all of this can only work when we are, the entire Atmanirbhar Bharat that we keep talking about. I think we need to really take it seriously, much more seriously.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, first let me disagree with you, Lavish, and say it's a random walk. If it was a random walk, then every other WTO member state would have broken the rules. Nobody has besides the US, despite the deepest provocation. So that shows that every other WTO member holds the binding rules of WTO important from a global value chains perspective, and let's hold on to that word.
Just to this thing, we need to understand the American view on this. They may not have explicitly, in many cases also explicitly broken the rules, but the fact is they broke the WTO spirit. There were a whole range of anti-dumping measures, quality control orders, not just India, but across the world, which were limiting American exports. Now, this was the complaint made. And therefore, they said that the spirit of WTO is not being respected by the world, including China, and also including India. So India was not their major in this thing. So then why should we respect it? So that's where they are coming from.
No, I'm talking about my internal thing. So you said that why are we?
So when you say random walk, what I'm saying is that this is that things are changing so rapidly.
Agreed.
Effectively.
But the agreements hold, and they hold for a reason, because businesses, much more than the tariff rates, they value certainty. When you don't have certainty, you don't have value chains. If I don't know what taxes will apply to me, what rules will apply to me vis-a-vis all my production centers, business stops, investment stops. So every other country with sense have not done this. Now, US has a peculiar way of approaching this problem. No doubt there are problems with the WTO. What I'm trying to say is that let's not assume that these agreements are not going to hold. just because one country is disrupting it right now.
No, Indonesia just changed its rules on WTO, on not WTO, on its free trade agreement with, I think it was the US.
No,
So Indonesia that changed it.
No, vis-a-vis USA, they have all got these so-called bilateral agreements, which are in many cases WTO non-compliant. But my agreement with Indonesia holds and is holding. I mean, my agreement and everybody else's agreement with each other. The disruptions have come in any agreement where US is a partner. So USMCA with Canada, Mexico, and it's gone for a toss, etc. And yes, they might, there are two kinds of weaponization happening: the weaponization of supply, which is by China, and the weaponization of demand, which is by US. So wherever the US has that weaponization of demand grip on any country, like Mexico, 80% of their exports go to USA. So they will force Mexico to do whatever they want. So they have forced Mexico now to put tariffs, 50% tariffs on all Asian economies. Now, this is not something the leverage they will have with other economies. So the larger point I'm trying to make here is, please don't assume that these rules have completely withered and they're going to collapse. Number one. So then question arises, internally, what can I do? There is no way in the world any country can have the ambition of developing all products on its own. There will be dependencies. So the global value chains will continue to operate. So I need to focus on the industries of the future, which will create jobs and the value chains, and where I have my strengths. My PLI scheme is essentially a response to that. If you see where my imports have gone up, and there is this wrongful messaging in our own discussion on trade also, that trade deficit बढ़ रहा है. Sometimes the trade deficit is increasing because I'm importing things to manufacture at home, either to export or compete with my imports from elsewhere. So if I'm going to make a refrigerator in the factory in Noida, I'll be importing a lot of components from Vietnam. So vis-a-vis Vietnam, which is a small economy and does not buy much from me, my trade deficit will increase. That's not a problem. The question is, overall, am I doing well or not, including with my services component? And why I am harping on the services, please understand, today everything that you buy, when you pay $1 for it, you are paying 65 to 70 cents for services. Everything that is got that appellation of smartphone, smart refrigerator, smart this, smart that, there is data and services that ride on that data that is coming as a part of that product. That's what you're paying for. And in that component, India is one of the world's strongest players, and it will be increasingly more so. So with the binding kind of access on services and manufacturing, I think on the value chain, we have a great thing going for us. We need to be resilient because we shouldn't allow these shocks, right? So what these shocks will have definite problems, as we were discussing with Sankalp. There is a massive headwind on labor-intensive sectors, because that's why? Because those are the ones with the highest price elasticity, handicrafts, RMG. People don't buy when prices go up. They're highly sensitive to prices. So you will have problems. We have to find domestic solutions to it, either short-term support to those industries to tide over this crisis, find alternative markets, etc. But I think overall, we will tide over this crisis. We are already cut to the chase. We have a strategy for the last 10 years. 90% binding market access. With vis-a-vis China, I have my MFN because those investigations take time, and sometimes you have to be WTO compliant with those 3 agreements, ASEAN, TRIMS, etc. So I just can't go ahead and put duties, anti-dumping or countervailing duties. So if my MFN tariff is my China tariff, and my bound rates, which I have committed in WTO, are 50-60%, nothing stops me within 5 hours from going from 7.5% to 40% if I think that there is a Chinese threat to me. So once I have got that strategy in place, I protect myself vis-a-vis China, build value chains with all other economies, and ensure that my services exports, which lead into all of this manufacturing, is taking place. I will create the job opportunities and the growth opportunities for the next 20 years, which is what I need to do.
So fantastic. So now we have the value chain, we have the global agreements that will hopefully stand. Sankalp.
Yeah. So I think you asked what India can do, right? I mean, that was the original beginning of the
building resilience.
Yeah, building resilience.
Internally.
I think. Yeah. No. So I think just quickly 2 points I would like to make. First is, do we see US still playing a major role for the next 2, 3, 4 decades? Yes, if that is the calculation, then I think we should do everything in our power to conclude the BTA. As we were discussing, I mean, it has moved beyond economics, and so it has moved into the realm of politics and geopolitics and maybe personality of Donald Trump. So I think, as Deng Xiaoping used to say, I think India should actually, hide your capabilities, bide your time, because we need America, we need American capital, we need American technology for transforming our own domestic economy, right? So for that, I think we will have to do everything in our power to do this. Secondly, I think excessive importance to sovereignty is something that I am actually having a problem with, right? Because in this world, there is nothing as absolute sovereignty. I mean, and it's basically a graded way of looking at sovereignty. So we can look at some issues on which there are non-negotiables, and then there are some issues on which we can negotiate. I mean, just the other day, Donald Trump had celebrated what he sent something like 58,000 tons of corn to Bangladesh. I mean, if Bangladesh can secure such small victories and make him happy and get what Americans are sort of, get Americans off their back, I think we can always do something like this, right? I mean, so we can always focus on making Americans happy to an extent where they give us what we are looking for, and then perhaps simultaneously focus on Europe, Japan, Australia, all the other developed countries which can help us in transforming our own domestic scenario.
Okay, so I'll again repeat. So building the value chains, getting the agreements right, working on them, being opportunistic, and very flexible.
I'll just start with slightly disagreeing with Sankalp.
Sure.
Trump wants Prime Minister Modi to call him up. And that is the exact reason he himself has stated it, tweeted it. That's why the trade deal is not happening. Why would Prime Minister? Because he mixes politics, economics, geopolitics, everything, and he just looks at social media and bases his domestic policy decisions and foreign policy decisions. He might as well said that India called me up because Operation Sindoor was not really working out well. So which is why he lies through his teeth. Why would Prime Minister Modi call him up? His basic reason is that Prime Minister Modi didn't call me up. That's about it. It's as juvenile as that. So I think we need to hold. It's true. This epoch of history. I think for the rest 20 years that I have till before I retire, when I teach this, it's just going to be laughable like this. This is how it is. This is the great power. So now we have a true two front, one from the US and one from the PRC. PRC does it very silently in very tacit ways. Doesn't do this crass behavior. That's why I use the term crass when I was speaking as well. So those are things which won't really happen. We're talking about the India narrative and the India way forward. Why do we kowtow to a bully who behaves worse than a 4-year-old child? Trade is trade. Yes, we have dependence, but self-respect, why do we throw our self-respect out? So first, starting with that. Second, what do we do domestically, internally? After Galwan, at least on these online platforms, there was a necessity for all products to list out rules of origin. How potent is that today? Rules of what is it? Country of origin. Sorry, country of origin. Country of origin is not listed in most of these online platforms now. Why is the focus being diluted all over again? That's one thing. Second, as Shreya also mentioned, when you do open the packages, there's a lot of this do numbery which is going on in between. It ends up being a product from PRC. There are several product categories which India can produce, and our consumption, 1.4 billion people, would be enough to absorb it, which is why Prime Minister Modi, during his August 15th speech, talked about domestic consumption. Make in India, consume in India. Some of the things we are not making, which is why we end up either buying, I try to buy not from the PRC, I end up buying from the US. That cell phone, the European Western charger is just one example of those. Or I'll have to get forced to buy some toys from the PRC. There are specific product categories which we need to realize. PRCs used to sell, at least till last year, one of the biggest things that they would sell to us would be smartphones or, say, childcare products. Why? Because demographic dividend. The youth uses cell phones, more than one. So produce cheap cell phones. They do that proper targeting. Why? Baby monitors. Unfortunately, in 2018, I had also ended up buying something which was a made in China product, but realized, there are products which we need to identify, produce, actually make in India, and make our own people consume. So that's from within the domestics. Thank you.
So you're talking about a more fine-tuned industrial policy for India. Great. So we have a direction. which this panel has given. I'd like to add one more, which is there is something deeply wrong in the way we have really developed our economic backend. It really doesn't make sense. Why are we such a high cost producer? Why do we have to have all of this, right? I mean, why should there be a milk problem? Why should there be a agriculture problem? Why should there be a China problem? What is it that they can do with 3 or 4 times the wage rates that we can't do? There is a deep, deep issue in India. It's not to do with our energy prices. It's not to do with our logistics prices. All of those are actually similar to those in the world, not different. And our wage rates are lower. So there is a deep issue. That issue, of course, has all been well identified. Is the way we run our own country. It may be the Inspector Raj, it may be regulation, it may be all the rules related to land and labor. But in the end, to win any battle, you need to have some strength, and the economic strength comes from low-cost production. It was very well identified that services is our strength, and absolutely, in fact, services is what has really saved us. Our manufacturing, by the way, numbers have gone down from 17 to 13% of the value added, not 15. So it's steadily reducing, not because it has gone down, but because services are the ones that are going up. So I think there's a larger picture here. It's a challenge that India has, and we need to work on within ourselves, and that's why the term inner resilience. Inner resilience comes from low cost production in the manufacturing sector. So this has been a very, I must say, quite an interesting and a thought-provoking session to me, at least. My 2-bit here is that when India was being conceptualized, our founding fathers and mothers had this concept that India would be different. There'll be something which will be very powerful that will be driving us. Aurobindo, in fact, called India a spiritual power. He conceptualized power, absolutely, but it was driven by spirituality. I'm going to take that, but problem with economics is that, as was also mentioned here, I mean, self-respect, spiritual strength, etc., very expensive economically, and that tends to be an issue. However, there is certain basic building blocks in India, and I think resilience will come from there. And the first and the most important one was absolutely, you were right, self-respect. And the question here is, are we fighting a battle or are we fighting a war? If we get too drowned out by the immediate, what's happening today, what's happening tomorrow, we'll miss the war for the battle. And let's remember that in the end, this journey is, if we are aiming at Viksit Bharat, let us say 2047, is that we do need to be able to grow at 10%. And more importantly, we need to achieve it some sort of equitable progress in some way. The point about education was very well made, and so on. So the fact here is that inner resilience is critical. Inner resilience can come by working on oneself internally. We have to go to the building blocks. There is no reason why India can't have large-scale factories. There is no reason why Indian PhDs can't be as good or better than Chinese, and in fact, many already are. So all of that has happened in other countries can happen in India. There is just one element, which is a constant correction. My complaint about India is we are very episodic. Let's do one reform. Let's do this. Okay, now let's wait for 5 more years to do the next one. Reform, change, progress are actually constant. They're a continuous process. So I think if India was to get its act together on just that part, that let's make change a continuous process, it's the inner resilience is but a given. So with that, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.